Give yourself permission to dream. We are starting a new series this week talking about the life that Jesus offers, and he offers us the chance to experience an adventure, as we're going to talk about in just a moment. A couple of dreams that were mentioned there were the dreams becoming a mom or a dad, and there's some of our couples in our church who experienced that this week. Phil and Diana Volta had their first, Joseph Roy, on Monday, and a little under 7 pounds. I got a chance to hold him, and he's just adorable. I have to, of course, say that my grandkids are the most adorable, but besides my grandkids, the two I got to hold this week were really special. So that is Joseph Roy. And then on Thursday, then you got to see Ashlyn Janey, born into the world, Escobar, to Will and Jeanette. And this is their third of I don't know how many. I didn't ask them. I bet if I asked them right now, the answer would be 3. But anyway, 2 just adorable babies, and so we're very, very happy and send our congratulations to them. And I want you to keep praying for them. Well, we did have a great time at men's retreat. Last night we got to hear from Sherman Smith, who is the running backs coach for the Seattle Seahawks. I don't know, any Seahawks fans here in the auditorium? Yeah, there we go. And so he gave his testimony, his story, and then he said, all right, you can ask me any questions. It took about 45 minutes of questions. The first question, of course, is, why in the world did you pass the ball from the half-yard line? So he explained that. But actually, he has quite an interesting story. He is a close friend of one of the pastors from our conference, Larry Adams, up in Golden Hills, one of our larger churches up in the Antioch area. Turns out Larry and Sherman Smith became Christians at right about the same time. Sherman first, and then Sherman helped Larry become a Christian. And so they've had he's had quite an impact on our churches and our conference. So it's fun to hear him. He's a really sold-out guy for Jesus, and then telling us about some of the things that God is doing in the lives of the Seattle Seahawks. And, of course, they have a lot of pagans on the team, so we'll keep praying for them. Well, like you, I have received thousands of offers in my lifetime. You know, the offer to get a magazine subscription for a fraction of the cover price, an offer to own a piece of Hawaii by investing in one timeshare or another, an offer to lease the car of your dreams with no money down, an offer to buy the latest, greatest gizmo for 4 monthly payments. No, make that 3 monthly payments of just $19.99. And thanks to the folks at Google and others, the offers we get every time we log on to the internet have become quite specific and fairly incessant. I went on to look up a story about the Golden State Warriors, who are playing today at 12:30 against the hated Los Angeles Clippers. But I was checking out an article about them, and now every web page I go to, there's this offer to purchase Warriors tickets or to purchase Warriors gear. I checked on the weather in Minnesota, where my mom lives, and now every web page I go to has an offer from an airline to fly me to Minnesota at the best rates available. They're on every web page. They're in our email inbox. They're on Facebook. They're on Twitter. They're on our phones. Every newspaper or magazine we might open. Offers, offers, offers. And let's be honest, in our lifetime, we've accepted many of those offers, haven't we? Some we're glad we did, and some were disasters right from the very beginning. The offer you can't refuse, how we wished we had refused it. The offer that's too good to be true, turns out it was too good to be true. So now we're a little more careful about the offers that we accept. In fact, we've become a little bit cynical about it, a little jaded. We've been burnt enough that our default response is now to reject an offer out of hand without giving it the time of day. Our assumption is that if someone is making us an offer, they must have an ulterior motive. They must be out to dupe us. Have you ever done this? Ever seen somebody out on the street handing pieces of paper out to passersby, and when they tried to hand it to you, you just walked by them as quickly as you could. You refused to even look at what they were offering. I mean, they might have been passing out free money or free season tickets to the Giants or A's, but it didn't matter to you because there was no way you were going to stop and take what they were offering. You assumed, based on years of past experience, that it was an offer that was going to be of no value to you. And many people do the same thing with the life that Jesus offers. In some respects, the life Jesus offers sounds too good to be true. And so people assume that it simply can't be true. In other respects, the life Jesus offers sounds too hard, and so they want to take a pass. Over the next 9 weeks, we're going to look pretty closely at some of the offers, the specific offers that Jesus makes to us. But let's start by just being completely honest and transparent about this. There is no bait and switch with the life that Jesus offers. There's no fine print that contradicts the headlines. No smoke and mirrors. And here it is. The life Jesus offers is incredibly hard, it is unimaginably good, and it is completely true. For the next 9 weeks, we're going to be journeying through the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament, the first of the 4 Gospels to be written down. And the first readers of that Gospel, the first audience, understood well that the life Jesus offers is incredibly hard. To a large extent, that's why Mark writes this Gospel. He writes to a people who are under severe persecution to encourage them to hang in there. The first readers of Mark's Gospel lived in Rome in the days of a particularly evil emperor by the name of Nero. You've heard of him. You might remember from your history classes the story of the great fire that burned much of the city of Rome. Many Romans blamed Nero for the fire. So Nero had to deflect attention and blame away from himself, and the way he did it was to focus on the Christians. Here's how the Roman historian Tacitus described it. He says, to suppress this rumor, the rumor that Nero fiddled while Rome burned, Nero fabricated scapegoats and punished with every refinement the notoriously depraved Christians, as they were popularly called. First, Nero had self-acknowledged Christians arrested. Then large numbers were condemned. Their deaths were made farcical. Dressed in wild animals' skins, they were torn to pieces by dogs, or crucified, or made into torches to be ignited after dark as substitutes for daylight. If you've ever been to Rome, you may have had a chance to explore what are called the catacombs. There's a series of tunnels that were dug underneath the streets of Rome. Those catacombs are where Christians hid from persecution. And it's to those Christians that Mark writes his gospel, to tell them the true story of the Jesus that they followed at risk to their lives. And one of the truths that Mark wants his readers to appreciate right from the start is that the Jesus they follow understands very well exactly what they're going through. If you've read the Gospel of Mark, just 16 chapters long, you know that Mark doesn't start, as a couple of the other Gospels do, with the nativity story, with the birth story of Jesus. It starts instead with a very brief mention of John the Baptist, and then the baptism of Jesus, and then the temptation of Jesus. And here's what Mark writes about Jesus' temptation. He says, at once the Spirit sent Jesus out into the desert. He was in the desert 40 days being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. Now, if you know Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel add a few more details to the story of the temptation of Jesus. But there's one detail that is found only in the Gospel of Mark. Maybe you caught it. Mark's gospel is the only one that tells us that Jesus was with the wild animals when he was out in the wilderness. Now, why would Mark mention that detail and the other Gospels don't? Well, think again about who his audience is. It's these Roman Christians who are hiding from Nero, living in the catacombs. And remember what Tacitus told us about how Nero had the Christians put to death? He had them dressed in the skins of wild animals and torn to pieces by dogs. And Mark wants his Roman readers to understand, to know that Jesus understands the kind of fear that they're experiencing. That he understands what it's like to go face to face with wild animals. Mark also wants his readers to know that Jesus understands what it's like to be hated, to be persecuted, even when you've done nothing wrong. You know, the Christians of Rome were completely innocent. They had nothing at all to do with the fire that burned the city down. But they were still hated, they were still arrested, they were still put to death. Just like their Lord was. Mark doesn't take long in his gospel to show us that Jesus getting on the bad side of the authorities. In the beginning of the second chapter of Mark's gospel, Jesus offers forgiveness and healing to a paralytic. And right away, the Pharisees start to badmouth him for that. At the beginning of the third chapter, Jesus heals a man who's got a shriveled hand, and he happens to do it on the Sabbath. And you remember the reaction. Here's what Mark says. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Right from the beginning of the gospel. Even though he's only doing good things, even though he's completely innocent. And Mark includes those details right up in the front of his gospel because he wants these Roman Christians in the catacombs to know that their Lord understands what they're going through. He understands that the life he offers them is incredibly hard because his life was incredibly hard. But there is much more to the life that Jesus offers us than hardship. I wanted to be upfront about that part of it this morning, the fact that following Jesus is hard. It's a theme we're going to come to a number of times in this gospel. But the book we're studying is called a gospel. And you probably remember what that word means. It means good news. The life Jesus offers us is incredibly hard, but it's also unimaginably good. In many ways, I know it sounds too good to be true. Does this ever happen to you? Ever have somebody who made an offer to you that sounded too good to be true? I've learned that when somebody makes me an offer that sounds too good to be true, they usually have a certain phrase that goes along with it. They usually tell me this: it's a no-brainer. When someone tells me now that it's a no-brainer, I know to turn and to run. Do you want to get rich without taking a risk? This is for you then. It's a no-brainer. And I'm thinking, the only person who would believe that is someone with no brain. Let me assure you of something about the life that Jesus offers. It is incredibly good. In many ways, it sounds too good to be true. But I assure you, it is not a no-brainer. Jesus doesn't tell us, hey, just leave your brains at the door and come follow me. You don't need to think about this. You don't need to evaluate whether or not it's true. Just put your mind in neutral and do what I tell you to do. That is not at all the life that Jesus offers us. Jesus invites you and me to think very carefully about the life that he offers us. He invites us to look at the evidence of his miracles, of his morally perfect life, the evidence of his resurrection, the evidence of his compassion and his kindness. He invites us and he challenges us to use our brains and to think deeply and critically and to decide whether or not the offer that he makes us is true. You probably remember how Jesus said it in John's gospel. I am the way and the truth and the life. The life Jesus offers us is unimaginably good, and just as important, it is completely true. So, what is it that's so good about the life that Jesus offers us? You know, over the next 9 weeks, we're going to see that Jesus offers to save us, and he offers to give us life after death. He offers us forgiveness and grace. He offers to answer our prayers. And this morning, our focus is on something that appeals to all of us, I think, at some time or another in our lives. He offers us a life of adventure. You know, a bunch of years ago, 20-some years ago, a Christian musician by the name of Stephen Curtis Chapman wrote a song called The Great Adventure. Here are some of the lyrics. I'm not going to sing it for you. At the end of the service, though, as we're walking out, you'll hear it. It goes like this: saddle up your horses. We've got a trail to blaze through the wild blue yonder of God's amazing grace. This is a life like no other. This is the great adventure. And when you hear it, you might think, that's not really my style in music. It's 20-some years old, although, as Bob Truard pointed out this morning, we listened to Mozart, and that's like 25 years old, I think, and we still think that's good music. But I always like that song, and even though it's pretty dated, I still will play it from time to time, and it always kind of perks me up. And whenever I hear the song, The Great Adventure by Stephen Curtis Chapman, I think of a famous quote by Helen Keller. Helen Keller, as you know, was blind and she was deaf. You would think that her life would be quite limited, pretty restricted. You'd think her top priority would be safety and security. But here is what she said. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. There is something in every one of us that yearns for life to be a great adventure. We want there to be something special about our lives. Webster's defines adventure as, quote, a bold, risky undertaking with an uncertain outcome, or as, quote, an exciting and unusual activity. And the Gospel of Mark tells us that is the life that Jesus offers. Look with me at how Mark describes his life in the very first chapter of his gospel. We're picking up the account in verse 14, right after the account we already read of Jesus being tempted in the wilderness and being confronted by wild animals. And here's what we read next. After John, he's speaking of John the Baptist. And by the way, CNN, I notice, has a special, it's going on 6 o'clock Sunday nights, examining some of the stories surrounding the life of Jesus. Tonight, it's on John the Baptist, so you might want to take a look at that. After John was put in prison, Jesus went into Galilee proclaiming the good news of God. The time has come, he said. The kingdom of God is near. Repent and believe the good news. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon, who we know later on as Peter, and his brother Andrew, casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. When Jesus had gone a little further, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. Now, when you first read that, it seems like, since it's the first chapter, it seems like this is the first time Simon and Andrew and James and John have ever seen or heard about Jesus. We know from reading the other Gospels, though, that these four have heard a bit of Jesus' teaching. They've had a chance to see some of the examples of his miraculous power. But even so, even though they know a little bit about Jesus, their response to Jesus' offer is pretty dramatic and pretty extreme. For example, Simon Peter, we know from the Gospels that he was married. But when Jesus makes Simon this offer to come and follow him, Simon doesn't say, you know what, I really need to talk about it with my wife. James and John, they don't say, you know, Jesus, we'd like to follow you, but this is our dad's fishing business. This is his boat. Before we decide to follow you, we've got to talk it over with him and see what he says. No, all four of them say, this is it. We're taking up your offer. We are following you. They leave everything behind, and they join Jesus in what turns out to be for them the adventure of a lifetime. So what does this adventure involve? In just the last few minutes we got this morning, I want to talk about two aspects of the adventure of following Jesus. There's obviously far more to it than just a little bit we get to talk about this morning. Most of you already know that, but let's at least hit a couple of the highlights. First off, there's the adventure of following. In his song, Stephen Curtis Chapman puts it like this: let's follow our leader into the glorious unknown. That's why following Jesus is an adventure, because we don't know where he's taking us. Jesus didn't lay it out for his disciples at the beginning. He didn't go to Simon and to Andrew and James and John and say, all right, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to be doing over these next few years. He just says, come and follow me. He didn't tell them the places they were going to go, what they would need, what the obstacles they would face might be. He simply says, follow me. I got to say that in most cases, that wouldn't work so well for me, because I like to know ahead of time where I'm going. I love maps. I've loved maps since I was 5 years old. We were in Minnesota at the time, and my dad said, all right, we're going to drive out for our first family vacation. We're going to drive to Disneyland from Minnesota. I hadn't even heard of Disneyland at the time. Disneyland, by the way, at the time was also 5 years old, just so you know. And he taught me, he sat me down with our triptych that we got from AAA, and I navigated our family. This is kind of a scary adventure for the family, but we did it all the way from Minnesota out to Disneyland. And I just learned, I fell in love with maps, and I learned I like to know where I'm going. I like to see ahead. I like to see the big picture. Now, there is an exception. I'm willing to follow somebody without seeing the big picture if I trust them. If I trust their character, if I trust their expertise. A few years ago, I went to India for the first time, and Pastor Abraham Phillip was my guide. And I followed him because I trusted him. He never gave me a map to show me where we were going once we got over there to Delhi. He never told me what the agenda would be at the beginning of the day. It was just get in the car and off we go. And I would ask him what we're going to see, and he wouldn't tell me, and he would just kind of smile, and we would drive off into the crazy Delhi traffic. There were times that, frankly, it was kind of scary. In many of you know this, lots of places in the world are like this. You don't really use your steering wheel so much to drive as your horn. Everybody is honking all the time. And I remember I had this conversation with Pastor Phillip because it seemed to me like we were weaving in and out, and that people sometimes came perilously close to crashing. And I said, I was trying to be diplomatic about it. I said, in America we have this law of physics that says two objects cannot occupy the same place at the same time. And he said, we don't have that here in India. So it was kind of crazy, but I trusted him, and he never let me down. There was one night we went on this 2-hour car ride in one of those little cars that he had borrowed, which was all beat up, so somebody had run into things with it. And first we were going through rush hour traffic in downtown Delhi, and then we go through a series of trails and potholes till we finally come up to this ramshackle building that seemed to be out in the middle of nowhere, starting to get dark. And then he begins to tell me, this is an area where Christians are suffering a great deal of persecution. It's really quite dangerous for Christians out here. I'm kind of glad he didn't tell me that ahead of time, but he did spring it on me right then. So I followed Pastor Phillip very closely when we got out of the car and started walking into that building. We go into the building. I have no idea. He still hasn't told me why we're there, what's going to go on. We get there. There's a few people there. And then within 10 minutes, the place fills up. I mean, about 300 people cram into this little building. Turns out there's going to be a church service on this night in the middle of the week. I am told we have to be careful not to call too much attention to ourselves. But when the singing started, it got pretty loud, I thought, and I'm a little nervous that maybe we're being louder than we should be, but nobody else seemed to be nervous about that. Then it came time for the sermon. I thought, this will be fun. I'll get to hear Pastor Phillip preach the sermon in his language, and this should be kind of interesting. And then he turned and he introduced me and said that I would be giving the message. I just, I don't speak Hindi. Wasn't prepared for this. And there's hundreds of people who now are all looking at me and seem to be very intent on what I have to say. And so I just begin to make something up. I can't remember what I said, but I spoke for about, when it's being translated, it's longer. So I probably spoke about 5 minutes, but it took about 45 minutes to give this message. And people, I think Pastor Phillip was in the background doing some things with his hands to get people excited and engaged. Well, then, that wasn't the end of it, because after the service, Pastor Phillip gets up and he invites people. He said, anybody who wants prayer for physical healing to come up. And he explains to them that Pastor Craig is going to lay hands on you for your healing. I had never done this before, and people are coming up to me, and they have some very serious physical problems. I was way out of my comfort zone, as you can imagine. But I did it. And the more I prayed with people, the more I started to think, you know what? Maybe God's really listening. Maybe God really can do something through me to help these people. It was a great adventure, to say the very least. Following Jesus is a great adventure. It can be scary. It can make you very uncomfortable. It can take you to places you never thought you would go. There's definitely sacrifice involved, but it is what you were made for. In the words of Helen Keller, life is either a daring adventure or it's nothing. Now, I'm sure you noticed that Jesus said more to his first recruits than simply, follow me. He said, come follow me and I will do what? I will make you fishers of men. Right from the beginning, Jesus made it clear to all of us who choose to follow him that he is recruiting us to be on a mission. The adventure he offers us is far more than the adventure of seeing interesting places or eating exotic food. It's the adventure of being used by God to change lives. Now, some of you maybe are thinking this. You're thinking, I know what's coming. I've heard these things before. This is where the pastor kind of yells at us for not passing out tracts or inviting people to church or that sort of thing. That's not what I'm going to say at all. It is true that Jesus offered Simon and Andrew and James and John the opportunity to become fishers of men. But let's think about that for just a second. What were they doing when he made that offer to them? They were fishing, right? This was their job. This was their career. This is probably what they had done since they were little kids. In Mark 2, just the next chapter, we read where Jesus makes a call to somebody else to be a follower of his. His name is Levi, also known as Matthew, the author of the first gospel in the New Testament. And he goes to Levi and he says, follow me. But in the text we read, Jesus doesn't say to Levi, follow me and I will make you a fisher of men. He just says, follow me. Maybe you remember the first thing that happens after Levi decides to follow Jesus. He throws a party. And he invites all of his tax-collecting friends to come so that he can introduce them to Jesus. But here's the point. When Jesus called fishermen to follow him, he used an analogy that they understood as part of their call. In essence, Jesus was saying to them, let's take your skills and let's use those skills to grow the kingdom of God. Let's take what you know and let's use that to impact the people you know. I think if Simon and Andrew had been architects or engineers, Jesus probably would have said something different to them than follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. He might have said, follow me and I will make you builders and engineers and designers of the kingdom. I will use who you are and who you know to make a difference for the kingdom and for the lives of people that you love. However we think of it, no matter what metaphor you might want to use that would fit who we are, the adventure that Jesus offers involves people. So let's call this the adventure of making friends. You know, some of you are already naturals at this. You discovered a long time ago how fun it is to make friends of new people that you meet. You make friends without even trying to. Others of us have to be more intentional about it. For some of us, it's more of an adventure. It means taking an interest in the person that you're ordering your Taco Bell meal deal from. I recommend meal deal number C, by the way. It means purposely going out of your house when you see your neighbor working in his yard, in the front yard, and going over there just to talk to him. It means being interested in people. And eventually it means talking to them about Jesus. I'm not talking about talking to strangers. I'm not talking about passing out tracts to people that you've never met or knocking on doors in somebody else's neighborhood. I'm talking about making friends with them and then at the appropriate time talking to them about the one that you follow, Jesus. I don't know if you ever heard this quote from St. Francis of Assisi. I actually heard this at men's retreat. Preach the gospel and if necessary, use words. It makes some sense, doesn't it? We certainly have to live out what we believe. Preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. Here's the thing. Francis of Assisi never said that. And the truth is that if you're going to preach the gospel message to your friends, you're actually going to have to use some words. You're going to have to say something. I mean, think of it. In a way, isn't it kind of arrogant for us to think, you know, if people will just look at my life and see what a nice person I am, they will then automatically know and understand that they should become like me as a follower of Jesus. They should know that that's why I am nice. And friends, there are a lot of nice people in the world. It's not just Christians who are nice. And frankly, Jesus didn't call us to be nice. He called us to join him in this adventure of telling people the good news of the gospel, the good news that it's possible to have a relationship with the Almighty God, that it's possible for us to be forgiven of our sin, that it's possible to have life after death, but only through Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now here's the thing. When we do this, we've got to make sure that we get the order right. Order is often very important, isn't it? Have you ever taught somebody how to use the TV remote? Someday, I promised I'll show my wife how to do this, but so far that's been off limits. We have DirecTV at our house, and let's imagine that I am showing my 2-year-old granddaughter, Mackenzie, how to change the channel so that she can watch Disney Junior. Now the truth is, she long ago figured out how to do this. But let's humor me for the point of this illustration. If she wants to change from the channel that God usually has on there, which is channel 206 for Sports Center, and if she wants to watch Disney Junior on channel 289, what does she have to do? She has to press 4 buttons. She has to press 2, 8, 9, and enter. Did your husband? He lets you use it once in a while. Good Lord, I'm glad to hear that. If she pressed 2 and then enter, and then 8, 9, what would she get? She would not get Disney Junior, right? The order matters. And in the adventure of life with Jesus, there's an order. First, of course, we follow Jesus. We stay close to him all day, every day. We listen to what he says. We do what he commands. We go where he tells us to go. Second, we make friends. Right where we live, right where we work, right where we shop, we notice people. We take an interest in people. We talk to people. We do what Matthew did. We have a dinner party for a whole bunch of people. We ask people, hey, can I pray for you? And then as the friendship grows, we find a natural way to tell them about the one who is our best friend in the world. I mentioned Mackenzie. I was taking her for a stroller ride to the park a little while ago. My wife, Mackenzie refers to my wife as Go-Go. That's her name for her. Brenda had been watching Mackenzie, but she needed a little break because she had some work that needed to get done for the law firm, and so I eagerly volunteered to take Mackenzie off her hand for a little bit and to take her over to the park. And so I got Mackenzie in the stroller, and we started heading over to the park, and I was trying to just chat with her and ask how her day was and those sort of things. And she wasn't actually volunteering a lot of information. But then we stopped, and she looked at me, and she said, Papa, Go-Go is my best friend. I love Go-Go. So I took out my wallet, and I gave her some money, and I said, no. And the way she was saying it to me, it was like, Papa, you should really give Go-Go a chance yourself. I think you might like her too. Mackenzie just couldn't help herself. She just had to make sure that I knew that Go-Go is her best friend, that she just loves this person so much. And it got me thinking, if Jesus is our best friend, if we love him that much, if we believe that Jesus is the best thing to ever happen to us, it's only going to be natural for us to tell our friends about him. Not at first, not when we don't go knocking up a door of a stranger to do that, but people that we love, that we care about, that we've made friends with, sooner or later we're going to want to tell them, hey, you need to meet my best friend. Let me tell you what he's done in my life. Here's my last thought for this morning. To experience this adventure of being used by Jesus to change the world, you don't necessarily have to leave your fishing nets behind and move to some other part of the country or of the world. In fact, it's far more likely that God wants to use you right where he's put you. You may have heard the name before of Richard Halverson. He was, for many years, the chaplain of the United States Senate. Before that, the pastor of a large church in Maryland. And it is said that at the end of every service that he led, he would close with the very same benediction. This is what it was. He says, you go nowhere by accident. Wherever you go, God is sending you. Wherever you are, God has put you there. He has a purpose in your being there. Christ, who indwells you, has something he wants to do through you where you are. Believe this and go in his grace and love and power. Jesus offers every one of us the adventure of a lifetime. So let's take him up on it. Let's get started. The band's going to come and lead us in one last song. And as they do that, would you stand with me as we have a moment of prayer together?